thank you so much, Jill and Caroline, for putting this together, because there couldn't be a better time to be talking about the future of work. I mean, it just couldn't be more time, especially, you know, as we move from that panic that surrounded us all at the start of the pandemic. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm really feeling that shift now into starting to prepare for the next era and for this unknown future. And I mean, for personally, I've spent about longer than I care to admit to anyone out loud, at least. I spent quite a lot of time working with people in the public and private sector, prepare for and lead change. And we've talked a lot about the future of work, you know, in those scenario planning sessions and horizon scanning and all that stuff. But this is absolutely the first time I've seen this not be talked about as a fiction. You know, when you do those quadrants and people are like, that'll never happen, this is now a lived experience for people. And I think this is what's so thrilling about it, to have as a discussion, because this is an opportunity to look beyond what we know and even beyond what we thought we knew. I think, you know, at Epiphany, when we set up in 2005, the whole principle of our company is that we get inspired by the movies because we know that the impact that has on our lives and the memory it delivers. And as I've been trying to make sense of what's been going on, and I haven't made sense of it yet, by the way, but as I'm trying to make sense of it all, you know, we've got this shadow of the social media pulpit full of misguided theories, all the fake news. So one line keeps coming to my mind from the very celebrated screenwriter, William Goldman, who said, "Nobody knows anything." And I think that's sort of where we have to be. So I'm really thrilled to have been invited to be part of this session at Workarama today, because anyone who's going to be watching this, listening to it, contributing, is ready to sort of gather multiple perspectives and get a sense of where we move next. Because otherwise we'll all just be stuck with those. This should be a 4-letter word, I think, the way it's being used at the moment. We talk about normal, don't we, and the new normal. I mean, what does that even mean? Who gets to decide what normal is? And I actually did a little film that Caroline shared on LinkedIn about normal, because it's abnormal, really, especially for young people who've grown up with the Twin Towers and the credit crunch and the referendum. And now, friends of mine who've got kids in their 20s, I was invited to a 21st birthday in social isolation. That's normal. That's the world that we're dealing with. And there are so many views of the future out there, aren't there? I mean, I love it in movies, you know, whether we're looking at dystopian stories or authoritarian stories or even existential philosophical stories. When you talk to people in finance, they've got their own issues around cash is king. We can't move away from this, you know, rein in all investment. Or when we're talking to people who have got facilities and office spaces, they're wondering, when are people going to get back in a lift again? When are they going to be comfortable with that? Or, as we've just all experiencing now with Pip or with Rufus, you know, we're all getting to become quite friendly with our colleagues' pets and their kids. And that's a great new level of intimacy that I don't want to lose, you know, as we move forward. So I'm thinking here, you know, is there a makeshift world that we're ready for? Because it's not, we can't just stay where we are. I mean, talking to some of the millennials in the organizations that I work with, their experience of working from home has not been my experience of working from home. It's not like we've cracked it yet. They're fighting for bandwidth in shared households and use of the shared space, the living room, where people are like putting notes all around the house, what time they need it, you know, and saying, I need the living room for that meeting. So it's not perfect yet. And I thought, try to make sense of all of this, I sat down and I had a bit of a think about what I'm really missing. What's the stuff that I really want to get back to? You know, because while I'm loving this sort of exchange and, you know, like this morning, not having to get up for a meeting, so I pressed a shirt to give it a sense of occasion, you know, like I'm going to go and have a meeting with people. But what am I really missing? I'm not missing pressing shirts, by the way. What I'm really missing is that casual, spontaneous, unplanned encounter. That's what's frustrating me the most, especially in the creative work that we do. So what I've created is this way of working where when we have a client meeting like this, for example, at the end of the client meeting, we have what I've termed the walk to the lift call. And it has to be a call. When the meeting is over, we have a voice call. I don't want to see a link ever. I want it to be spontaneous. And just as we were walking to the lift after a client meeting, we give each other a little bit of feedback. We share a few thoughts on how we felt the meeting went, and it always delivers actionable points. It's a really valuable thing. And, you know, I think I'm quite wary, actually, that when we go back to the office, which I know is starting in dribs and drabs over the next few weeks, I don't want us just going back to that horrible space. I mean, I used to work in Tokyo, and I've got some really bad memories of conference calls. With Asia Pacific meetings, there was always somebody coming in for a conference call, and the person that came in with a conference call was always a bit excluded. Do you remember? They were never really involved. And I'm scared that we'll get back to work meetings where virtual is going to end up being a problem, not a blessing. So I've already said to my team, if one person is virtual, we're all virtual. That's the way it's going to be. I don't want those huddles happening after meetings. We're all in a private, quiet room of our own. And a bit like, you know, like we're doing now, if one person's on video, we're all on video. If one person's on audio, we're all on audio. I think we need to find these rules and understand just how we move forward. And one of the challenges as well is that it's not all new, this. It's not like we've been talking about the future of work in March 2020. We've been talking about it for a long time. It's not a new conversation. I mean, God, working from anywhere is a conversation that feels as old as the hills, really. And people have been trying to work out just what they can build on from the future and what's been new. And I think when I look back in time, I'm concerned about the barriers that prevented us moving forward in the future of work and how many of those will continue. Do you remember all those conversations about working from home when middle management just kiboshed them because of lack of productivity conversations, or when a CIO would sit there and say, there's just no way we'll roll this technology out, it'll never be adopted. All those conversations, all those barriers swept aside in 4 weeks. Yeah? And you know, and I'm concerned that technology will then once again be a bit of a problem for us moving forward, because technology's been a hero and a villain in all this future of work conversation. I mean, it's always been a bit of a Faustian bargain, hasn't it, technology for us? Because on one hand, it's giving us all this freedom, it's giving us all this access, it's allowing us flexibility. But on the other hand, it's saying that we're on 24/7, it's, you know, we're under constant surveillance, and maybe even it'll take our jobs away from us. That's a real concern with artificial intelligence. So I think it's quite simple for people to move back to work and say, here are some technology solutions that we can use to build on what we've done so far during lockdown. But I think before we start finding technology solutions and being at the mercy of vendors, as we were, I think, in the late 90s, when those of you who are old enough to remember, like me, when data started being archived everywhere and there was no real data governance, and we were just, people just believed in the first technology they heard about or were able to buy or to understand. We have to sit down and work out just what is it that we want. What is it that we want to build on in this future of work? Technology is an enabler for us in this. It's not the driving, it's not the determinant, it's the enabler for us. And I don't think everyone's necessarily having the right conversation about what we want, because there are some people who are really thinking about the here and now. I mean, tactics have become strategy in the last 12 weeks. We know this because we've been in the panic survivalist mode. But there's also a group of people who are justifying their roles on delivering operationally, on making sure that they're managing the employees and the customers in the here and now. And that's absolutely fine when we're in a survivalist move. But as we move forward, is organizational status quo the only way to be? Because actually we're not working in a traditional cause and effect, predictable environment anymore. It's much more about incremental change of complex systems. And I'm very, very concerned that we'll be trying to judge a world of dynamic change, where everything is under constant shifting and it's unpredictable, using the principles and the theories that we adopted for a world where, I mean, there's never been certainty in our world. Of course there hasn't. But I know 10 years ago, I sort of knew what was coming. I had a really good, I could make a good call, but now resilient organizations have to understand that as we've lived through this experience, there's much more unlikely stuff on the horizon that we at least have to be thinking about and be prepared for. And I think there's a bit of a concern that there are some biases that people have in organizations. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the behavioral science around bias, but biases are cognitive challenges that we have because they make it easy for us to make decisions by certain things that are rooted in our minds. And there are lots of biases to talk about, but there are two that I'd like to flag up that have come in conversations that I've been having with people. The first is loss aversion. And loss aversion is built on the psychological impact of losing something compared to gaining something. And it's twice as powerful. The psychological impact of losing something is twice as powerful as the benefit of gaining something, the pleasure of something new. And that means that people are unwilling to take risks, and sometimes actually will be willing to behave dishonestly if it means they don't have to go into a new world and to think again. And there are leaders who are going to benefit from the status quo. There are managers who are going to benefit from this state. And I think we must be assessing the cost of them making a decision that's not so rational, that's built on their experience to date. And the other bias that I'd like to flag up is something that, if you get a chance to read it, Professor Dunning's work at Cornell is fantastic, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And he sat down with his grad student, Kruger, and said, why is it, it's a good question, why is it that when you learn a little bit about something, you feel quite confident in your knowledge about it, but as you learn more about it, you realise how little you actually know, and there's so much more to learn. And I think the Dunning-Kruger effect is something we've got to really be conscious of moving forward as well, because we've all had, as I said earlier, a lived experience, an incredibly personal, intimate experience. And I think people will extrapolate from their own experience rather than necessarily thinking of that millennial that I mentioned before, or people that are working from home, or we saw very recently in furlough. And, you know, as great as the Treasury were and quite surprising in some of their decisions, the way they sort of missed the fact that how do you furlough someone on maternity? And then they had to go back and reassess it. And I think the Dunning-Kruger effect is going to be something that's going to call on quite a lot of empathy for us, because when you see Dunning-Kruger effect in action, you see very little empathy. You know who I'm talking about. There's this sort of impact out there in the world. And it's quite natural for us to overestimate our skills. This is a natural impact, and we're going to have to really force ourselves to ask how much we know and where we go to really understand things. I'm quite wary that the certainty that Dunning-Kruger and loss aversion provide marries quite neatly with the fundamentalism as well. And, you know, we're experiencing this right at the moment. And to counter this, we're going to need leaders that are ready to act in a turbulent age and not be embarrassed by having to ask questions and the uncertainty that lies ahead, but we're ready to say, right, well, this is an opportunity for us to stretch ourselves. And also to say that maybe we won't get it right first time, which is not something we've ever been rewarded for. Well, certainly not in my lifetime. That's not the way that things work. So in a very Pavlovian way, it's not natural to think like that, if that's the culture that you've been brought up in. I mean, I think the real tension for me, moving forward, as we talk about the future of work, the big tension is that we've worked in our organisations, in corporates particularly, in a very industrial age fashion, haven't we? The structures and the hierarchies have all been built around that. For the knowledge age, for the age of self-employed, autonomous entrepreneurs, it doesn't fit that way of thinking, how we've operated. And I think now we have to now we have to ask ourselves, is our mindset right for this world of networked individuals, people who are confident in their autonomy, people who are self-motivated and don't need presentism or to be lashed by middle management? And that comes down to having the right mindset. And that's why I was really chuffed when Jill and Caroline asked me to be part of this today, because, as I say, it's easy to think technology is the answer, but in my experience at least, mindset is absolutely at the heart of all of this. Because when we talk about change, when we talk about being ready for change, people often say they talk about change, but what they really mean is what I've got right now, just a bit better. They don't mean anything that's sort of out of their comfort zone or something that they don't really understand. And mindsets matter because mindsets are our way of viewing the world. And very often it's just a backdrop. It's the way we were brought up. It's the culture of an organisation. We now have to take that backdrop and move it into the foreground, I think, and start to assess how we think about how we think. And there's some fantastic work been undertaken by Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford. And I think her work has revealed how important our mindset is in allowing us to persist in the world, and especially when we come up against barriers, when we're faced with challenges. And there are fundamentally two mindsets that Carol's exposed us to in her work. And Carol's work has been adopted, you know, when Microsoft moved from being the not so sexy organization compared to Apple or Samsung to being who they were. Well, Carol was working very closely with the board on that. It is something that can be seen to have outcomes in business, because there are two mindsets she's identified. And one is the fixed mindset and the other is the growth mindset. Now, the fixed mindset is a belief that everything in our lives, our character, our capabilities, our capacity is predetermined, right? That we're born with this particular set of skills and that's all we've got. So if you have a fixed mindset, you're consistently looking for positive feedback about that thing that you think you can do. You're always looking for opportunity to demonstrate how great you are at that. So you stay in a very narrow width of activity because you constantly get recognized for it and people tell you how great you are at that. Now, people with a fixed mindset expect things to come quite easily to them because they've been told that they're good at that. They don't really want to stretch themselves or put effort into things. And to be fair, this is not just a challenge in corporate environments. At school, do you remember when somebody would tell you at school, oh God, you've got the fingers to be a pianist? It wasn't if you were, Mike, I don't know, are you a pianist? But they didn't say if you work hard, anyone can be a pianist. That wasn't the start of the conversation. People were telling us about things in different ways. So I do think there's an awful lot of history that's wrapped up in the fixed mindset. And if you are in a fixed mindset environment and you therefore have a fixed mindset, the world becomes a very black and white world, a world of success and failure. You know, it's a world where you try and stay where you are in what you know. And for the future of work, the fixed mindset is going to avoid blended and hybrid ways of working, which are what I'm hoping to work towards. Not it's either or. You're either in the office and have no contact with anyone, which is not natural, which is you're either at home and have no contact with anyone, which we know is unnatural, or you're only ever in the office and not having the flexibility that this social experiment has shown us. And on the other hand is the growth mindset. And in the growth mindset, we have a belief that skills and capabilities are qualities that can be developed through consistent effort and hard work if we dedicate the time and find the right resource. People with a growth mindset know that better performance is not always something you're born with or something natural. It's something that's testament to how you approach something and the commitment you put towards it. And subsequently, they then view failure, and failure is a dirty word and we know it's tainted, but they view learning as a positive experience and something that allows you to keep adapting and moving forward. I mean, I personally call the growth mindset the learning stance. That's how I prefer to think of it, because it's got immediately an outcome attached to it. It's the power to believe that our skills and our abilities are always available to us if we put time involved, if we cultivate them and are willing to accept we're not going to get there straight away. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's not necessarily going to happen in a straight line. I mean, it tends to be a zigzag. I don't know about the rest of you. Maybe it's just I fall over and graze my knee a lot learning new things. And I always remind myself of that first bicycle experience when I fell over and my father said, get back on the bike. I said, you're not going to learn otherwise. And I think that we actually have at Epiphany the Falling Off Your Bike Award that we give to people at the end of the year for the person that got back on their bike, because we think that's really, really advantageous to people. And this, I know, Caroline, you touched on this on your film as the introduction for today. The learning mindset, the growth mindset also taps in to the reinforcement of a need for a diverse workforce that doesn't all see it in the same way and through the same eyes. And this debate could never be more germane, the diversity debate. And I feel as if now we've got a fantastic opportunity to stretch our thinking and to unleash new amounts of creativity and possibility in our organisations by bringing teams together that wouldn't have been brought together previously. But this will only happen if we move away from a narrow, fixed mindset into a growth mindset. And I'd love to be hearing your thoughts on all of this, as I wrap up this speech, because what's not going to change is a challenge that I've got to everyone I'm talking about at the moment. And I'm not just saying the negative things and the biases, but also what's not going to change in terms of the principles that we always had in our work. Maybe we should be thinking about that rather than worrying about the technology to replicate what we know now in our work into the future. Maybe it's not a straightforward replication we need. Maybe it's a much more imaginative stuff. Maybe it's about looking out there and not knowing. And it is a fearful world, when you move out of your comfort zone. Of course it is. But I think it's actually one that we've never had a greater opportunity to embrace. And as I say, the diversity debate has never felt more relevant to the development of organisations than it is right now. So I'd like to now just touch on a few tips that I've learned when I've been, when I've educated people about a growth mindset, when I've run transformation sessions or coaching sessions. People always want something to hold on to. Of course you do. So here are some things that I've learned that I've been able to use. First is just this power of the word yet. Yet is a great word to use. As opposed to, we've all grown up, haven't we? In the last 15 years particularly, an incredibly fast-paced world of high expectation, immediate gratification now. Can you do this for me? Yes or no? Right, can you do that? Do you know? What's great about the word yet is, I can't do that for you yet. Right, at the moment, everyone's learning how to do online presentations like this and speeches, and everyone on the team knows to say to me, Asif, I'm not quite there yet, or I'm looking forward to learning about that. I haven't got time for it yet, because yet is still a promise. It's not dismissing something, and it puts in your mind the fact that this is something that you are committing to. And for other people, it's a great negotiation tool as well when you're trying to work out where things sit in terms of priorities. And as I mentioned, I used to work in Tokyo years ago, and one of the philosophies that I adopted while I was out there was the Kaizen Philosophy, which is Japanese for continuous improvement. And, it's not about leaping from a world that we all knew in offices, sitting at desks, all facing in one direction, working in that hierarchy, to all of a sudden being autonomous, self-motivated, entrepreneurial whiz kids. But there are steps that we can take, and there are small things that we can do. And the memory of Kaizen for me is in one statement when I was told, if we improve 1% every day, within 70 days, you're twice the person you were at the start. And I love that thought, that just a 1% improvement every day with the, sorry, I'm not a mathematician, so I can't do the interest additions, but it adds up to a completely new person, an additionally new person within 70 days. So I think that's a much more realistic way of approaching things. And chunking and chaining, if you find changes that are all linked up together. It's an interconnected world. None of these things are so separate that you dedicate your time to one month and one the next. They can all come a lot closer together than we thought. And when we talk about growth mindset, especially when I deal, and I work in logistics, and I work a lot with cabinet office in government, and we work with very, very engineering mindsets, very rational people, and they hear about the growth mindset and they think, that all just sounds much too fluffy. That all sounds much too wide-ranging and expansive for me. I need stuff to be able to grab onto. And I would say that the growth mindset is about moving you away from the binary path of thinking where you have no space for risk. You only have space for diligence and rigor. But there is space for diligence and rigor in the growth mindset. I mean, data, I'm not a data scientist, but I am a massive champion of data in all of my decisions now. It's another tool, but I wouldn't let it stop me from making a more risky decision. It just helps me in building my case. And the motif that I like to leave everyone with on this is, you don't need a parachute to go skydiving, but you do need a parachute to go skydiving twice. So you're going to always have some backup, some story to make this possible. This is not about throwing caution to the wind by any means. This is about making yourself more able to deal with risk and embrace that opportunity. And the final thing I'd like to leave you with, this is my final slide, is a rule that I've taken from a master. Standing on the shoulders of giants is very, very easy at the moment. And it's Darwin. And Darwin obviously took on board a number of very large challenges in his life, and some great institutions that weren't ready to be challenged. And Darwin said that his entire purpose, everything that he did, was about dedicating time and brain power to challenging everything that he believed as true, all of the evidence that he had, all of the assumptions that he had, all of his theories. He spent his life trying to disprove those, because only by doing that could he move beyond the sacred and the not so sacred, the precious and the fragile ideas that he would protect. He would be able to smash through by challenging things on a daily basis, this one golden rule. And if I've got one hope from this experience that we've had, as scary and obviously as tragic as it's been for us, as much as expansive, is that we take Darwin's golden rule on board, and that we start rewarding questions as much as answers in our lives, that we see that as a good way forward, that we release this imagination that we know we have, but it may have been reined in previously, and that we start to champion genuinely collaborative approaches rather than just reverting to our own personal experience from lockdown. And that's what I'd like to leave you with all today. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. As I say, it couldn't be more pertinent, and I hope I've contributed to the conversation in some way.
It's great, Asif, as always. I mean, as you Asif and I have had many conversations about this over the last couple of weeks. So I don't know if anyone had any questions or comments. Mike, you said you'd done a podcast for the Kaizen Effect company.
Oh, right.
There's a chap called David Raybould who lives quite near here in Leon, just up the coast from where Karen and I live, and he specialises in facilitating Kaizen Effect sessions with people.
Right.
And we did an interview about 2 years ago. I'm sure it's of no interest to anybody but me and David, but I put the link there about it. So it was just you touched lots of things in your talk, Asif, and that was just one of them that particularly resonated.
No, that's great. I think, as I say, this is another challenge that I've had in talking to people about change, is that everyone feels like we're starting at ground zero, from like March the 23rd. These conversations have been live for a long time. But we've put those barriers in the way, we put that bias, or even like education around Kaizen, Mike, as you raise. These are not conversations that have necessarily been championed previously. Maybe that's the opportunity that we have now to introduce those new ways of thinking, and to also, but without saying, oh, you were all wrong. At least we can now sort of say, let's open our minds.
Am I allowed to ask other questions? Because there's plenty of other people on the call.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said, Asif. And in fact, that's my experience as well. But I joined a company 7.5 years ago. It was a sort of a group of social entrepreneurs in a network style. So but we were a virtual company, and our byline was the future of work, full stop, now, full stop. So we've been championing the future of work for 7.5 years, and indeed working with CIPD in terms of explaining what future of work means. And it's not just about remote working, there's a lot more to it. And if you, and Jill and I are going to be talking about this afternoon, so I don't want to sort of pinch any of the sandwiches from that, but we model ourselves a little bit on Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organization, not completely, but in terms of becoming a teal type organization, if you know what that is. I'm sure you do.
No, that's thrilling, actually. I think that, you know, we've actually got a lot of experience. I mean, you must, at the moment, Mike, I don't know if Fran is with Caroline as well, we're seeing a lot of like bad experiments as well. As I said, for millennials in particular. I mean, it's been one of my greatest achievements in the past 12 weeks is convincing a client to just give all of his team under 25 enough money to get bulletproof broadband at home. Because it's just not fair to them to expect to work in this way, you know. Because people, they were like, "Well, I'm fine at home. Why isn't everyone fine at home?" It just doesn't. And I think that have you found this, Mike? Is there empathy there in the way people are talking about moving forward, about the mix of people in the office?
Indeed, I got one top tip actually on broadband for people that are working from home, and I tried it out myself, which is phone up whoever your internet service provider is and threaten to leave. In fact, take the option about cancelling the contract, because that always gets you through to an operator much quicker than if you want to do something else. And as a result of threatening to leave, they doubled my broadband speed, and they not quite half, took a third off the cost. So I've got 200 megabits per second now for about £10 cheaper a month. So it's a trick well worth trying.
Top tip from Mike there. I've done that as well, though. I have done that as well. Although clearly my broadband was struggling this morning because it couldn't do Zoom and Facebook Live and everything else. So need to get onto Virgin and say what's going on. Jill's raising her hand, but she's...
Jill, you're on mute.
You just need
unmute. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to, it's really interesting, Asif, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on what you said about creativity, because I think that is going to be absolutely vital going forward. It's something that I touch on my presentation, because one of the things that I'm constantly being asked at the moment is, you know, what do we need to provide people when they're working from home? You know, I'm constantly getting that question, and there isn't one answer. And my answer is a bit more complicated than this, but you need to be creative about it, because don't copy what everybody else is doing. That isn't the way forward at all. You need to think about, what's your organisation? Who are the people that work for us? What are they doing? What's going to appeal to them? What do they need? And really have that conversation and create something that's going to work for you guys, not everybody else. It really doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. What do you need to do to move it forward? And that's going to have a huge impact on recruitment and retention and all of that kind of stuff. If you can just really sit down with that blank piece of paper, really, within your teams and talk to your employees, it's going to be enormous going forward. So I think creativity is going to be really, really important. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jill. I think this conversation, again, it feels like it's a digitally enabled now, because people used to live in much more hierarchical organizations, and, you know, conversations went on in corridors, but now they're going on across multiple platforms. And if people aren't part of that conversation, they're going to be at the mercy of the conversation. And I think it's really important for, there's, as I say, conversation is almost a tool for a complex world, whereas before it's been a pain in the backside because it's what's going on. I heard a great thing. I don't know if this is true, so take it within that scope. But for every one formal piece of communication in an organisation, there are 64 informal pieces. So, you know, somebody, if a CEO says something, there are probably 64 conversations going on the side about what he said or she said, you know, and I think we need to be conscious of that. And I mean, yeah, I think that's what you know, with Flex and all these new platforms for us to engage in are so valuable, because people need you know, they just need to get words out there, and shared language. I can't wait to see what language starts to emerge. I bet people at the OED are going crazy as to what will be the words of 2020 you know, in the Oxford English Dictionary. What words will we all have, you know, for Scrabble next year? You know, what's going to be out there?
Yeah. You muted.
Is that Caroline?
Yeah.
Myself. I muted myself, sorry. That's because Jill's in my kitchen. We're socially distanced in the same house. And
He's making the coffee then.
No.
Well, apparently not. I'm apparently still making coffee. So, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, and there were other things that we've talked about a lot, and I know you touched it on your talk, is that empathy that I think, you know, goes back to your point about saying to the CEOs about, you know, offering broadband to people. It's empathy of their living situation and the type of you know, home situation that they've got, you know, because and I think when you're not in, you know, if you're living in a lovely, comfortable house where you've got a separate office and separate room to do your work all day long, you just assume everyone else has. And that isn't the situation for many people.
I heard the other day, actually, one of my friends whose daughter's a nanny said that they've got a nice house, the family she looks after, but they've got two very, very noisy boys. So one of them has started using the car as the office for meetings. And I thought, see, we're willing to stretch our minds now like that when we're put in that situation. So to build on what you're saying, Caroline, I think if we can share experiences. I saw this morning Kate Middleton is sponsoring a new exhibit that's going to be the Duchess is about our experiences in static imagery. But I think the more we ask, what were other people's experience like? You know, then the more I mean, it's great. We're all getting to look in each other's houses at the moment. I've looked in every one of my clients' houses and associates' houses, which would have taken a lot longer to get to usually. But
so you can also see then that the clock in my kitchen that Jill is sitting at is an hour and 5 minutes slow.
Well, British summertime, it'll go back soon. But I think people need to sort of understand it's not just that square that you've got their life by looking in that little square. Outside of that square is the chaos.
Yeah.
And I think people need to be curious enough to look outside of the square. Because it's very easy to sort of extrapolate, isn't it? From look at, you know, what I want to do is get a screen grab mic and look at the books you've got on the shelf above your head, because that's the greatest intimacy there is. In what books do people keep in their study, you know?
Indeed it is. And outside the square, that sounds like a title of a podcast or a new book.
Doesn't it?
Could be. Well, maybe outside the box has moved to outside the square now. So.
All right. Okay, well, I think that kind of draws it to a conclusion. Thank you so much, Asif.
Thank you.
As always, for your insights and contribution. I'm sure we'll be continuing to have this conversation for many months to come.